Rusted chains echoed across the muddy auction block as a cruel alpha sold his rejected mate for a single copper coin. A filthy burlap sack concealed her supposedly cursed face. But when the ruthless Alpha King bought the nameless Omega and tore away her hood, his heart stopped dead. The mud of the Blackwood trading outpost was thick with the stench of wet fur, cheap ale, and despair. In the harsh, unforgiving year of 1422, the northern Lycan territories did not deal in mercy. They dealt in power, blood, and flesh. King Darius of the Winterborn court stood at the edge of the pavilion, his heavy fur-lined cloak pulled tight against the biting wind. He despised the slave markets. As the Alpha King of the largest unified territory in the north, he had outlawed the trading of Lycans within his own borders. Yet, diplomacy required him to attend the annual gathering of the High Alphas, if only to keep a watchful eye on his enemies. His beta, Timothy, stood beside him, arms crossed over his leather breastplate. "This is a waste of our time, Darius. It's nothing but petty warlords trading their cast-offs." "Patience, Timothy," Darius murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated over the noise of the crowd. "We are here to watch Alpha Cedric. The Blood Moon Pack has been pushing their borders. I want to see how wealthy he truly is." A man's coin purse at an auction tells you exactly how prepared he is for war. On the raised wooden platform, the auctioneer slammed his heavy iron staff against the floorboards. The crowd of rowdy, scarred werewolves quieted as a new lot was brought forward. Alpha Cedric swaggered onto the stage. He was a broad, arrogant man, with cruel eyes and a permanent sneer carved into his features. He held a thick iron chain in his fist. At the end of that chain, stumbling over the uneven wooden planks, was a tiny, frail figure. The crowd erupted into confused murmurs. The girl, for she was so small, she hardly looked like a woman, was dressed in little more than a collection of ragged, mud-stained tunics. Her hands were bound tightly in front of her, the rusted iron cuffs eating into her bruised wrists. But the most striking thing about her was the heavy, coarse burlap sack, tied securely over her head with a thick hemp rope around her neck. "Behold!" Cedric roared, yanking the chain so hard the girl fell to her knees. She didn't make a sound, only trembled violently against the cold dampness of the wood. "I offer you a rare prize today, gentlemen, a creature of unparalleled misfortune. My pack's most useless, barren, and pathetic Omega." Laughter rippled through the audience. A few tankards were slammed against the tables. "Why the sack, Cedric?" yelled a burly alpha from the southern marshes. "Is she so ugly she'd turn our ale sour?" Cedric grinned, showing elongated canines. "Worse, she is cursed. The witches of the Briarwood laid a hex upon her mother before she was born. Her face is a hideous ruin of scarred flesh and rot. To look upon her eyes is to invite the plague into your own home. I have kept her hooded since she was a child. When she came of age, the moon goddess, in her infinite cruelty, revealed that this blight, was my fated mate." A collective gasp echoed through the pavilion. To reject a fated mate was a grave taboo, an act that deeply scarred a wolf's soul. "I rejected her immediately, of course," Cedric boasted, puffing out his chest. "I severed the bond and took a strong, beautiful female as my Luna, but the Omega remains a stain on my lands. I brought her here to be rid of her. Use her to scrub your floors, throw her to your hounds, or let her starve in a dungeon. I care not. Bidding begins, at a single, silver piece." Silence fell over the crowd. Superstition ran deep among the Lycan packs. No one wanted a cursed Omega, especially one that bore the stigma of a severed mate bond. The silence stretched, thick and humiliating. On the stage, the girl lowered her hooded head further, her shoulders shaking in silent sobs. Darius watched her. His rational mind told him to look away, to ignore Cedric's pathetic display of cruelty. But his wolf, the massive, primal beast residing within his soul, was clawing frantically at the edges of his consciousness. "Mine," the beast growled. Darius stiffened. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sudden, overwhelming scent that had managed to cut through the reek of the market. It was a faint, delicate aroma. Crushed lavender, fresh rain, and something uniquely sweet, like white honey. It was coming from the stage. "A silver?" Cedric mocked, looking around the silent crowd. "Come now, are you all cowards? Fine. A single copper coin. Who will give me a copper for the cursed Omega?" "Don't do it, Darius," Timothy whispered urgently, noticing the sudden rigidity of his king's posture. "It's a trick. She's dead weight. You have a kingdom to run." Darius didn't listen. His boots moved before his mind made the conscious decision. He stepped out of the shadows of the pavilion, his towering frame immediately drawing the eyes of every alpha present. The murmurs died instantly. The Alpha King of Winterborn commanded a terrifying respect. 1 gold coin. Darius's voice rang out, cold and absolute. Cedric's jaw dropped. He blinked, staring at the intimidating king. King Darius, you bid a gold piece? For this? He kicked the girl's side lightly, causing her to curl into a tighter ball. A low, vibrating growl ripped from Darius's chest, so menacing that several men in the front row took a step back. Touch her again, Cedric, and I will rip your arm from its socket and beat you to death with it. Cedric swallowed hard, raising his hands in a placating gesture. She is yours. Your grace. A gold coin. Sold. Darius walked up the wooden steps. He didn't look at Cedric as he tossed a heavy gold piece onto the floorboards. He reached out and took the rusted chain from Cedric's trembling hand. As Darius's fingers brushed the iron, he felt a jolt of electricity shoot up his arm, settling directly in his chest. He looked down at the trembling figure at his feet. Stand up, he commanded gently. The girl scrambled to her feet, her breathing erratic beneath the heavy burlap sack. She kept her head bowed. Darius didn't pull her. He simply turned and walked back toward his carriage, the Omega following him like a terrified shadow. He had no idea what he had just bought, or why his soul felt as though it had just been irrevocably tethered to a cursed, nameless girl. The journey back to the Winterborn stronghold took 3 grueling days. Throughout the carriage ride, the Omega had remained pressed tightly into the furthest corner of the velvet-lined cabin. She had refused food, refused water, and refused to speak. She slept in fitful, terrified spurts, whimpering softly beneath her hood. Timothy had ridden outside on horseback, refusing to share the carriage with what he deemed Cedric's hex. Darius, however, stayed inside. He spent the 3 days silently observing her. He noticed the way her delicate, soot-stained fingers were perfectly proportioned, lacking the rough calluses of a lifelong scullery maid. He noticed the quiet dignity in how she held herself, despite her obvious terror. When the massive iron gates of Winterborn Castle finally closed behind them, Darius let out a breath he felt he had been holding for days. The courtyard was entirely different from Cedric's muddy camps. It was paved in clean cobblestone, surrounded by towering, warm gray stonework, and illuminated by roaring braziers that smelled of pine and cedar. Darius dismissed his guards with a sharp wave of his hand. He stepped out of the carriage and reached his hand inside. The Omega flinched away, pressing her back against the carriage wall. "We are home," Darius said, his voice softer than any of his subjects had ever heard it. "You are safe here. Come." Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out. Her bound hands rested in his massive palm. Darius effortlessly lifted her down from the carriage. He didn't hand her over to the servants. Instead, he led her up the grand sweeping staircase, past the bewildered stares of his courtiers, and straight into his own private, heavily guarded chambers. The king's room was vast, warmed by a massive hearth that took up an entire wall. Thick furs lined the floors, and tapestries of ancient lichen battles hung from the stones. Darius guided her to a plush velvet armchair by the fire and gently pushed her down into it. He walked over to his desk and picked up a silver hunting knife. When he turned back, the girl was shaking violently, her ragged breaths audible through the rough fabric of the sack. She thought he was going to execute her. Darius knelt before her. He was a giant of a man, hardened by decades of warfare, yet he approached her with the caution one might use when approaching a wounded bird. "I am going to cut the ropes," Darius said quietly. "I'm going to take off the chains, and then I am going to remove the sack." "No," a voice rasped. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was painfully hoarse, cracked from disuse and dehydration, but beneath the damage, it was melodious. "Please, my lord." Alpha Cedric spoke the truth. "You must not look at me. It will bring ruin to your house." "Cedric is a fool," Darius replied firmly. He slid the sharp silver blade under the thick ropes binding her wrists. With one swift motion, the ropes snapped. He unclasped the heavy iron cuffs, tossing them onto the stone floor with a loud clang. He frowned at the raw, bleeding skin of her wrists. Then, he reached for the thick hemp knot at the base of her neck. "Please," she sobbed, bringing her hands up to try and hold the sack in place. "I am hideous. I am cursed. They told me my face is a punishment from the goddess. If you look at me, you will be disgusted. You will throw me to the wolves. Please, just let me keep it on. In my kingdom," Darius said, gently grasping her wrists and pulling her hands away from her face. "No one wears chains. and no one hides in the dark. With deft fingers, he untied the knot. He gripped the rough burlap fabric at the bottom, and slowly, deliberately, pulled it up and over her head, tossing it onto the blazing fire where it immediately began to burn. Darius rocked back on his heels. The breath left his lungs in a sharp, sudden gasp. His heart physically seized in his chest. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, turning her face away, bracing for the inevitable scream of horror, the slap, or the disgust. But Darius was paralyzed. He wasn't looking at a monster. He was looking at the most breathtakingly beautiful woman he had ever seen in his centuries of life. Her skin, though smudged with dirt and pale from lack of sunlight, was flawless, resembling polished alabaster. Her bone structure was aristocratic, with high, elegant cheekbones and a delicate, straight nose. Her lips were full and naturally rosy, trembling in fear. A cascade of long, matted hair fell around her shoulders, hair that, beneath the grime, was a stunning, luminescent shade of pure white gold. "Look at me," Darius whispered, his voice trembling. Slowly, anticipating his wrath, she opened her eyes. Darius dropped the knife. It clattered noisily against the stone. Her eyes were not the standard gold, brown, or blue of a common lichen. Her left eye was a deep, mesmerizing violet, swirling with the colors of a twilight sky. Her right eye was a piercing, metallic silver that seemed to glow in the firelight. Heterochromia of that specific, legendary pairing. Darius's eyes trailed frantically down her neck, landing on the junction of her collarbone, where the ragged neckline of her tunic had slipped. There, etched perfectly into her pale skin, was a distinct birthmark, a crescent moon pierced vertically by a silver broadsword. The mark of the sovereign. Darius's mind reeled as centuries of hidden history crashed down upon him. 200 years ago, the royal High Lichen bloodline, the ones meant to rule over all alphas, was supposedly slaughtered in the night by a rogue faction led by Cedric's ancestors. The usurpation had plunged the Lycan world into centuries of territorial wars. The defining trait of the true royal females was the mismatched violet and silver eyes, and the mark of the pierced moon. She wasn't a cursed Omega. She wasn't a deformed, barren creature. She was Genevieve, the lost heir to the high throne. And as the intoxicating scent of lavender and white honey flooded Darius's senses, completely uninhibited now that the sack was gone, his wolf howled a single, undeniable truth into his mind. Mate, queen, ours. Darius, the most feared alpha king of the continent, bowed his head until his forehead touched her dirt-stained knees. "My queen," he breathed, his voice thick with absolute reverence. "Forgive me for putting you in chains." Genevieve stared down at the massive, terrifying warlord kneeling at her feet, her violet and silver eyes wide with utter shock. For the first time in her 20 years of life, Genevieve slept on silk. After Darius's shocking display of reverence, he had immediately summoned Martha, his most trusted confidant and the head healer of Winterborn. When Martha, a tough, no-nonsense elderly female wolf, had entered the king's chambers and seen the girl sitting by the fire, she had dropped her basket of bandages and fallen to her knees just as Darius had. The older generation still remembered the legends. They knew what the violet and silver eyes meant. Martha had gently led Genevieve to a sprawling, heated bathing chamber. The water was infused with healing herbs, rose oils, and crushed pearls. As the years of filth, grime, and the lingering stench of Cedric's dungeons were washed away, the true extent of Genevieve's beauty and fragility was revealed. Her body was dangerously thin, scarred by years of abuse and malnutrition. Genevieve sat perfectly still in the warm water, staring blankly at the marble walls. "Why are you doing this?" she had whispered to Martha. "Why isn't he punishing me?" Cedric said. "Cedric is a dead man walking, child," Martha had replied fiercely, her hands gentle as she combed the knots from Genevieve's white gold hair. "He lied to you. He lied to the whole world. You are no Omega. You carry the blood of the first kings. You are the rightful sovereign." Now, dressed in a sweeping gown of deep midnight blue velvet that swallowed her small frame, Genevieve sat on the edge of a massive four-poster bed. A heavy silver tray of roasted meats, fresh bread, and sweet fruits sat untouched beside her. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Darius stepped inside. He had changed out of his traveling armor and wore a simple black tunic and dark trousers. Even in casual clothing, he radiated absolute terrifying power. Yet, as his eyes locked onto hers, the harsh lines of his face softened completely. Genevieve instinctively shrank back, her hands gripping the silk bedsheets. Darius stopped in his tracks, forcing himself to remain by the door. His wolf was pacing aggressively inside his mind, demanding he claim his mate, hold her, scent her, and bury his face in her neck to announce to the world that she belonged to him. But Darius fought the primal urge with every ounce of his legendary iron will. She was broken. She needed time, not a possessive alpha. "You haven't eaten," Darius noted gently. I am not used to such rich food, Your Grace," Genevieve whispered, her mismatched eyes darting toward the floor. "Darius, call me Darius," he requested, walking slowly to a chair opposite the bed and sitting down, keeping a safe distance. "Tell me, Genevieve, how did Cedric's pack come to have you? The records say the entire royal family was burned in their castle over a century ago." Genevieve swallowed hard, tracing the embroidered patterns on the quilt. "My mother, she was a direct descendant. She lived in hiding, as a rogue. When she was pregnant with me, she was caught in Blood Moon territory. Cedric's father, the old Alpha, recognized her scent. He killed her." A tear slipped down her pale cheek. But Cedric's mother, the Luna, intervened. She was deeply superstitious. She believed that shedding the blood of a royal infant would bring a 100-year famine upon their lands. So, she took me. Darius's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, the wood groaning under the pressure. "She kept you alive, as a slave." "She kept me hidden," Genevieve corrected softly. "She injected me with liquid wolfsbane every week since I was a child. It stunted my growth. It silenced my wolf. It made me weak, like an omega. And when I began to show, the eyes. She put the sack over my head. She told everyone I was a cursed, deformed thing. She told Cedric I was a monster. When I came of age, the goddess paired me with him. But because my wolf was suppressed, and because he couldn't see my face, he only felt the bond of a weak, deformed creature. His pride couldn't handle it. He rejected me before the whole pack." Darius's chest heaved as a terrifying rage built within him. Cedric hadn't just tortured an innocent girl. He had unknowingly tortured his own fated mate, blinded by his own vanity and his mother's lies. By rejecting her, Cedric had severed the mate bond, leaving Genevieve free, and the moon goddess, in her infinite wisdom and sense of justice, had tied Genevieve's severed thread directly to Darius. "He threw away a queen," Darius said, his voice dangerously low, "for a single copper coin." "He doesn't know," Genevieve whispered, finally looking up, her violet and silver eyes pleading with him. "Darius, if he finds out, if the other alphas find out who I am, they will unite against you. They will not want a sovereign to return and take their power. You must let me go. I will run away. I will not bring war to your home." Darius stood up. He closed the distance between them, ignoring the frantic pounding of his heart. He knelt beside the bed, reaching out to gently cup her cheek. His thumb brushed away, a fresh tear. The moment his skin touched hers, a wave of golden, vibrating warmth rushed through both of them. Genevieve gasped, her eyes flying wide. Even with her suppressed wolf, she felt it, the undeniable, soul-deep pull of a true mate. "I am the Alpha King of the North," Darius vowed, his silver eyes blazing with absolute conviction. "I command the largest army on this continent. Let them come. Let Cedric realize what he threw away. I will burn the Blood Moon pack to ash before I let anyone put you in chains again." But even as Darius made his vow, treason was already taking root within his walls. Down in the lower courtyards, a stable boy who had been heavily bribed by Blood Moon silver had seen the girl being led to the bathing chambers. He had seen the discarded burlap sack. And, most importantly, he had heard the whispers of the older servants, who had caught a glimpse of her mismatched eyes. A sleek black raven took flight from the highest tower of Winterborn, disappearing into the dark, snowy night, carrying a small, tightly rolled scroll tied to its leg. 2 days later, Cedric sat on his throne of bone and iron in the Blood Moon Hall, his new, haughty Luna, Beatrice, draped across his lap. A scout ran into the hall, dropping to his knees and holding up a small scrap of parchment. "A message, Alpha, from our spy in Winterborn." Cedric snatched it, breaking the seal. As he read the words, the color completely drained from his face. His hands began to shake. "The ugly Omega is a lie. The sack hid the face of a goddess, violet and silver eyes, the pierced moon mark. She is the lost sovereign, and Darius has claimed her as his mate." Beatrice frowned, looking at Cedric's horrified expression. "My love? What is it?" Cedric shoved Beatrice off his lap, Standing up so violently his throne toppled backward. He had sold her. He had publicly rejected his own fated mate, thinking her a monster, only to hand the ultimate power, the true queen of the Lycans, directly to his greatest rival. The humiliation, the staggering loss of power hit him like a physical blow. If Darius presented her to the world, the lesser packs would flock to the true royal bloodline. Cedric would be ruined. "Call the banners," Cedric roared, his eyes flashing the crimson red of a deranged alpha. "Send envoys to the southern and eastern packs. Tell them Darius of Winterborn is harboring a witch attempting to usurp our lands." He turned to his beta, his chest heaving with manic desperation. "Draft a letter to King Darius. Cite the ancient law of unwitting commerce. The sale was fraudulent. Demand he return stolen pack property immediately. If he refuses, we march on Winterborn." The winter arrived early that year, cloaking the northern mountains in a thick, unforgiving blanket of blinding white. But the chill in the air was nothing compared to the icy dread sweeping through the continent. True to his maniacal word, Alpha Cedric had marched. He did not come alone. Leveraging decades of alliances, blackmail, and outright bribery, he had amassed an army of nearly 10,000 Lycan warriors from the southern and eastern packs. To bolster his front lines, Cedric had even emptied his pack's treasury to hire the infamous human mercenary commander, John Hawkwood, a real, private military tactician whose heavily armored human battalions were notorious for hunting rogue wolves with silver-laced weaponry. It was a desperate, taboo tactic, but Cedric was a man cornered by his own catastrophic arrogance. Inside the impenetrable stone walls of Winterborn, the atmosphere was a heavy mix of grim preparation and cautious hope. Darius stood on the battlements, the bitter wind whipping his dark hair as he surveyed the sprawling enemy encampment setting up across the valley. The fires of Cedric's army looked like a sea of fallen stars against the snowy landscape. "Hawkwood's presence complicates things. Your Grace, Timothy," Darius's loyal beta, muttered, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "Silver-tipped pikes and crossbows. They intend to break our front line from a distance before the wolves even clash." "Let them try," Darius growled, his golden eyes unblinking. "Winterborn has never fallen. We hold the high ground, and our walls are thick. But instruct the archers to target the mercenaries first. I will not have my wolves slaughtered by human silver." While Darius prepared for a physical war outside, Genevieve was fighting a grueling, agonizing battle within the royal chambers. For 2 weeks, she had been bedridden, gripped by a violent, consuming fever. Martha, the head healer, explained that this was the purging. For 20 years, Cedric's mother had poisoned Genevieve with liquid wolfsbane to suppress her sovereign wolf. Now that the poison had been stopped, Genevieve's body was violently expelling the residual toxins, making way for a spirit that had been caged since birth. It was a terrifying process. Genevieve would thrash in the silk sheets, her skin burning hot, crying out in pain as her bones cracked and realigned. Her suppressed wolf was clawing its way to the surface, demanding to be felt. Through it all, Darius never left her side when he could spare the time. He would sit by her bed for hours, holding her trembling hands, wiping the sweat from her brow with cool cloths, and letting his calming cedar and pine scent wash over her to soothe her panic. "I am a burden," Genevieve rasped one evening, her mismatched eyes, one twilight violet, one glowing silver filled with tears. She looked at the dark circles under Darius's eyes. "Cedric is at your gates. You are facing a war because of me. You should have left me on that auction block, Darius." Darius leaned forward, pressing a tender kiss to her burning forehead. "I would fight 1,000 wars before I let you spend another second in the dark," he murmured fiercely. "You are not a burden, Genevieve. You are my mate, you are my queen, and very soon, you will feel the strength that has been stolen from you." On the morning of the winter solstice, the war horns echoed through the valley, a deep, mournful bellow that shook the snow from the pine trees. Cedric rode out to the center of the frozen plains on a massive black warhorse, flanked by the treacherous John Hawkwood and a dozen alpha allies. Cedric looked up at the towering gates of Winterborn, a megaphone made of hollowed horn raised to his lips. "King Darius!" Cedric's voice echoed off the mountains, dripping with false bravado. "You have stolen property of the Blood Moon Pack. Surrender the scarred Omega, and pay reparations for your insult, and we will spare your people. Refuse, and we will leave Winterborn a graveyard of ash and bone." High above on the battlements, Darius did not shout back. He simply raised his right hand. A volley of 300 flaming arrows launched from the Winterborn towers, soaring through the gray sky and landing in a perfect burning line, exactly 10 yards in front of Cedric's horse. The beast reared up in panic, nearly throwing the arrogant Alpha into the snow. "If you want her," Darius's voice boomed, carried perfectly by the wind and his immense Alpha aura. "Come and claim her, Cedric. Let us see if you have the spine to face the king you woke." The siege began. Hawkwood's mercenaries advanced first, their heavy iron boots crunching against the snow, raising massive wooden mantlets to protect against Winterborn's archers. Behind them, thousands of lycans shifted into their massive wolf forms, a terrifying tide of fur, fangs, and bloodlust. The clash was deafening. The gates of Winterborn held, so Cedric's forces brought forward massive battering rams forged from ironwood. Darius, realizing that a static defense would eventually crumble under the sheer numbers of the combined enemy packs, made a bold, dangerous tactical decision. "Open the gates," Darius ordered Timothy, pulling his heavy broadsword from its scabbard. "We meet them in the choke point. We do not let them break the doors down on their terms. We break them on ours." Timothy nodded, shifting into a massive, grizzled gray wolf. The heavy iron chains of the main gates screamed as they were winched open. Darius led the charge. He did not shift immediately. Instead, he waded into the human mercenaries with his broadsword, his supernatural speed and strength making him a blur of lethal precision. He severed pikes, shattered shields, and carved a path of devastation through Hawkwood's ranks. But Cedric was a coward, and cowards fought dirty. From the ridge, hidden behind a line of archers, Cedric signaled a group of dark witches he had smuggled into his ranks. They began to chant, the air rippling with foul, unnatural magic. A thick, blinding fog rolled down the mountain, disorienting Darius's forces. In the confusion, a mercenary crossbowman, paid a small fortune by Cedric for this exact moment, took aim from a hidden vantage point. The trigger snapped. A thick, silver-laced bolt tore through the fog, embedding itself deep into Darius's shoulder. Darius roared in agony, dropping to one knee as the toxic silver immediately began burning through his veins, neutralizing his healing abilities. Seeing the Alpha King fall, Cedric's wolves surged forward with renewed, frenzied bloodlust. High in the royal tower, Genevieve gasped. She bolted upright in bed, clutching her chest. A searing, blinding pain ripped through her left shoulder, mirroring Darius's injury perfectly. The mate bond. It was fully active. Her king was bleeding. "My lady, you must lie down," Martha cried, rushing forward with a fresh, damp cloth. "No," Genevieve whispered. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her bare feet hit the cold stone floor. For the first time in her life, she did not feel frail. The fever had broken. The wolfsbane was gone. In its place was a rushing, thunderous torrent of ancient, raw power. She could feel the earth beneath the castle. She could hear the heartbeats of every wolf on the battlefield. She walked to the massive arched window and looked down at the carnage. She saw the fog. She saw the silver bolt protruding from Darius's shoulder as he fought desperately to hold the line, surrounded by a dozen blood moon wolves. A deep, echoing growl vibrated in the room. Martha backed away in shock. The sound hadn't come from a wolf. It had come from Genevieve's throat. "They are fighting for a lie," Genevieve said, her voice dropping an octave, layered with an ethereal, commanding resonance that made Martha immediately drop to her knees in submission. "It ends now." Genevieve did not bother changing her clothes. Wearing only her simple white silken nightgown, she walked out of the chambers. The guards stationed at her door moved to stop her, but as she turned her gaze upon them, her violet and silver eyes flared with blinding, luminescent light. The guards froze, their wolves whining in absolute reverence, and fell to their knees as she passed. Down on the battlefield, Darius was fading. The silver was spreading toward his heart. He swung his sword, decapitating a blood moon wolf, but 3 more took its place. Cedric, seeing his victory at hand, finally shifted into his muddy brown wolf form and stalked forward through the snow, ready to claim the killing blow. Suddenly, a sound cut through the din of battle. It wasn't a horn. It wasn't a clash of steel. It was a howl, but it was not an ordinary howl. It was a sound that seemed to fall from the sky itself, a crystalline, soul-piercing melody that resonated in the very marrow of every lichen present. It was a sound that hadn't been heard on the continent in 200 years. The true alpha frequency, the voice of the sovereign. The battlefield fell utterly, terrifyingly silent. Hawkwood's mercenaries looked around in confusion, untouched by the magic. But every single werewolf, from Darius's elite guard to Cedric's frontline soldiers, was instantly paralyzed by the sheer weight of the aura pressing down on them. The heavy oak doors of the castle keep opened. Genevieve walked out into the freezing snow. She was barefoot, her white silk gown billowing in the wind, her brilliant white gold hair flowing like a banner of light. She didn't walk. She seemed to glide over the blood-stained snow, untouched by the cold. Cedric's brown wolf froze, his ears pinning back in absolute terror as he recognized the scent. It was the lavender and white honey of the Omega he had sold. But the scent was no longer weak or masked by dirt and fear. It was overwhelmingly potent, intoxicating, and commanded absolute obedience. Genevieve walked straight through the parted ranks of warriors. The blood moon wolves whined, their legs giving out as they involuntarily dropped to their bellies, submitting their throats to the tiny woman walking past them. She reached Darius. She knelt gently in the snow beside him, her delicate hands gripping the shaft of the silver bolt. "Genevieve, you shouldn't be here," Darius grunted, his eyes wide with awe as he looked at his mate. "I am exactly where I belong," she whispered. With one swift, brutal pull, she yanked the silver bolt from his flesh. Darius gasped, but Genevieve pressed her glowing hand over the wound. A surge of golden warmth passed from her palm into his body, accelerating his healing factor until the wound closed entirely. She stood up and turned to face Cedric. "Alpha Cedric of the Blood Moon," Genevieve spoke, and her voice was amplified by the ancient magic in her blood, rolling over the valley like thunder. She pulled the neckline of her gown down slightly, revealing the undeniable mark of the sovereign, the crescent moon pierced by a broadsword. The allied alphas who had marched with Cedric gasped in horror. They realized the catastrophic mistake they had made. They had not come to fight a usurper. They had brought war to the doorstep of the true High Queen. "You called me a monster," Genevieve declared, her mismatched eyes locking onto Cedric's terrified gaze. "You hid me in a sack. You poisoned me. You rejected me. And then, you sold your rightful queen for a copper coin." Cedric shifted back to his human form, falling to his knees in the red snow, trembling violently. "Mercy, your grace. I did not know. My mother lied." "Your mother lied," Genevieve agreed coldly. "But you chose cruelty. You chose vanity. You brought weapons of silver against your own kind, and you waged war against my mate. The punishment for treason against the crown is absolute." She didn't need to lift a finger. She didn't need to order Darius to execute him. Genevieve simply turned her gaze to Cedric's own beta, a massive wolf who was groveling in the snow nearby. "Cleanse your pack of this rot," Genevieve commanded. The beta didn't hesitate. Driven by the irresistible compulsion of the sovereign's command and his own disgust at his alpha's cowardice, the beta lunged. A single, sickening crunch echoed across the silent valley as Cedric's reign of cruelty was ended by his own second-in-command. Hawkwood, seeing the supernatural display and realizing his contract was entirely void, wisely ordered his mercenaries to drop their weapons and retreat. They vanished into the tree line without another word. The thousands of enemy wolves remained kneeling in the snow. Genevieve stood amidst the carnage, the unquestionable ruler of the north, south, and east. She turned back to Darius, the fierce, terrifying warlord, who had looked past a burlap sack and seen the woman beneath. Darius stood, sheathing his sword. He dropped to one knee before her, taking her small hand in his massive one and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Long live the queen," Darius rumbled, his voice filled with pride and boundless love. And as the sun broke through the heavy winter clouds, illuminating Genevieve's brilliant silver and violet eyes, the entire valley of 10,000 wolves threw their heads back and released a deafening, unified howl to the heavens, welcoming the return of their true sovereign. Did King Darius and Queen Genevieve's epic triumph leave you breathless? The treacherous Alpha Cedric finally got exactly what he deserved. If this thrilling tale of rejected mates, hidden royalty, and ultimate vengeance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this video with your fellow fantasy romance lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible daily werewolf stories.